Hello guys, hope that you are good. This is part second of our lecture series on research methodology, research process. In this lecture, there will be a little introduction about the concept of research process, and also we will discuss the different outlines at the different stages of this process. So what is meant by research? Research process actually consists of a series of steps. And these steps are actually followed by the researcher for the completion of research work efficiently. And the concept of research process actually it describes that this research process consists of certain key stages or key elements, and also these stages have a relationship between one another. So that means that the research process consists of several stages, and each stage have a certain relationship with one another. Although there are different research models, different models of the research process existed, each research process consists of different number of stages, but the overall concept of the research process are actually the research process is the same journal elements. And uh, this research process we are going to discuss consists of 8 steps. That is why this research process is also called 8-step model of the research. We divided the research process into different phases. Each phase consists of different tasks, and then each phase further consists of various steps. So research process is divided into 3 phases, and during first phase, the researcher actually decide that what the researcher do, or what the researcher have to do in the research process. The second phase is the planning phase, and the task which involve in this phase how the research do, how to do the research work. And the third phase, this is actually the experimentation phase in which the actual research work is done by the researcher. Phase one consists of only one step, and this step is actually the selection of the research area in which the researcher select a research topic, they develop research objectives, research question, and they formulate hypotheses. Once the research have decided about the research topic or research area, then the researcher enter into the second phase, which is the planning phase. And this phase consists of 4 steps. One is the reviewing the literature, developing theoretical and conceptual framework related to the research process. And third one is clarification of the hypotheses or research objectives. And the fourth and last stage of the second phase is the development of the research design. Once the planning is completed by the researcher, then they enter into the actual stage of the research process, the experimentation phase, in which this phase consists of 3 steps. In the first step, the researcher collect the data. After data collection, they analyze that data, and this finally they draw a conclusion about the research topic. Now we will discuss each step. The first stage or first step is the selection of the topic. Remember, for the researcher, this is the most critical stage in the process of the research, that they have selected appropriate topic or appropriate area of the research. So in this stage, the researcher develop a preliminary type of research question, and they set a preliminary set of objectives and also formulate hypotheses. So that is why this is the most crucial stage of the research process, because if the researcher select such a research topic or they formulate such a research objective that are inappropriate, then remember that will create difficulties for the researcher in the final stages of the research process. So that is why that is the most critical phase, that always select such a research area or such a research topic, or develop such objectives which can be achieved easily. So the researcher should deal this stage in more careful way. After selection of the research topic, after development of the research objectives, the second stage is the reviewing the literature. This is also the most important and critical stage of the research, because literature review is actually the integral part of the research. This is very essential, because this step consists of critical reading of the relevant literature about the research topic. After critical reading, the researcher actually evaluate and organize the existing literature which are related to the research topic. After reviewing the literature, the researcher then assess or evaluate the knowledge that the researcher have in that area, and this is the most important one. If the researcher have a good knowledge about the researcher area, then they will easily complete the research project. So in this stage, during this stage, the researcher should the aim of this stage, that the researcher become an expert in the field of research. The main theme of this stage, that the researcher become an individual researcher. They become an expert in the area, and they are going to conduct a research study. So this is an important stage of the research process. After reviewing the literature, the third stage is to develop the theoretical and conceptual framework about the research topic. Actually, theoretical framework refers to the theoretical approaches that are the theoretical approaches that will be adopted by the researcher for the conduction of the research study. And the conceptual framework actually defines the concepts that are important within the research area, research topic. So after critical reviewing the literature, the literature, it helps the researcher to develop and refine the theoretical or conceptual framework about the research topic. So it is the most important, essential, or vital part of the research process, that the researcher have well developed their theoretical and conceptual approaches in the topic, in the research topic. Because once the researcher develop their theoretical and conceptual framework, so the researcher well aware the potential problem before that will arise in the process of the research. So this is the most important stage of the research process. The fourth important stage is the clarification of the research question or objective. Remember the three stages, the first, second, and third stages of the research process, they are interrelated with one another. They are related one another because once the initial research objectives are selected by the researcher, then after performing the literature review, after developing the theoretical and conceptual framework, then the researcher have the choice to investigate and to investigate the research objectives, and these objectives may be rejected or maybe changes. Certain changes can take place after the reviewing the literature and developing a theoretical and conceptual framework. So after in this stage, actually the researcher develop a good focused research question, and they formulate a well-developed research objectives and hypotheses. So the importance of developing a clearly focused question in research of objectives is the main function of this stage of the research process. The most important stage of the research process is selection of research design. This is the most important stage. And actually, this research design actually contain or they consist of the information for the researcher about the targeted population. They have get information about the research instrument. The researcher can develop the data collection procedures, and they also evaluate or select or design the data analysis procedure. And the targeted population means that the researcher know about their population, from which population or from where they will be collect the data, which will be the sample size, how many samples will be collected by the researcher, and after that they design instrument for data collection, that which method or which instrument will be used for data collection. For example, they will use either interview, they will use questionnaire. Questionnaire will be open-ended, they will be close-ended. Either they will use surveys. So all these methods will be decided by the researcher before going to the actual experimentation phase. So this is the most important technique or method for the collection of the primary data. After after identification of the research instrument, the researcher, the data collection procedure, what are the exact procedure that the researcher should adopt it during the data collection? Which procedure will the researcher adopt for collection of the data? And these are very important to ensure the validity and reliability of the data. This is the most important one. So in this, the researcher actually need to collect answer to the research question, and this will be performed by the adopting the data collection procedures. The data analysis procedure is the next step in the research design. Here, the researcher actually select the appropriate statistical technique. That what will be the appropriate statistical technique that will be used for data analysis. Whether the researcher will use ANOVA, whether they will use t-test, whether they will use chi-square test, whether the regression or correlation analysis will be performed by the researcher. So all these things will be covered in these steps of the research process, the research design. After selecting the targeted population, after selecting the sample size, the instrument for data collection, after defining the data collection procedures, after defining the data analysis procedure, then the researcher enter into the last phase of the research process, which is the experimentation phase. During this phase, this is the data collection. The first step is the data collection. Now everything is available. Everything is available. The data collection procedure is available. The instrument for data collection is available. Then this stage, simply the researcher collect the data. After the data collection, the next phase is data analysis phase. So during this stage 6, the data will be collected and then analyzed by using the appropriate statistical technique. So method of data analysis should always be relative to the objective of the research. That is, your analysis should answer the research question or hypothesis. So always the researcher will use the appropriate statistical technique for the data analysis. And after data collection and data analysis, the final stage of the research process is the interpretation stage. Here, the researcher draw a conclusion about the research topic. They will decide about whether the hypothesis will be accepted or rejected. So this is the final interpretation phase. In this phase, the researcher actually get their objectives. They also highlight the strength and weakness of the research process, and they also recommend for future research studies. And actually, after this phase, this is the final reporting phase, or reporting phase in the form of writing research thesis and research paper. So, in summarized form, research process is actually a series of steps. We can divide this research process into 3 phases. In first phase, the researcher decide about the research topic. In the second phase, the researcher perform researcher do planning for the research work. And the third phase is actually the experimentation phase. Each phase consists of various steps. This research process consists of 8 steps. That is why we can call this 8-step model of the research process. So all these about the research process. Thank you.